If you were expecting a lot of U.S. salaries to increase January 1st by law, that's not happening because that legal rule just got struck down in court, Texas federal court. So backing up, in the U.S., to be classified as exempt, meaning no matter how many hours you work, you're paid a set salary, so you're not eligible for overtime and things like that, you generally have to meet two tests, like a duties test, like what do you do for your job, and there's different categories that you can meet. The other is a minimum salary test. So you have to be paid on a salary basis and paid a minimum salary. And there's some exceptions, but that's for often those exempt roles, it is that minimum. And so in April of this year, the U.S. Department of Labor issued a rule that would increase that minimum amount in 3 different steps. So the first step was July 1st. So it would increase from the prior amount, which was about $35,600. It would go up to almost $44,000. So that happened. January 1st, it's scheduled to go up to almost $59,000. So a big jump. And after that, every 3 years, it's scheduled to automatically increase based on economic data. So this rule was put into effect. And as I said, it did take effect already, like step 1 on July 1st, except for one employer, and that was the state of Texas. Because the state of Texas had filed a federal lawsuit saying, well, the Department of Labor doesn't have this authority to do this. And a Texas federal judge had agreed with that state of Texas. So Judge Sean Jordan, he halted it again, just for the state of Texas as a government employer. Took effect for everybody else. So some people, if you're making like $40,000, their salary went up, let's say to $44,000. At other times, some employees may have been converted from exempt, so you're paid salary exempt, to being non-exempt. So all of a sudden you have to keep timesheets and things like that. So your pay may not change, but all of a sudden now you have to keep track of your time worked and you're non-exempt. And so that's what some employers have already done, and a lot of employers and employees were looking at for January 1st. So some have been like, oh my God, I'm going to get an increase on January 1st. Others were like, wait, why am I going to start having timesheets on January 1st? And that's why. Because that minimum was going up by so much that employers were deciding whether to increase it or move people to non-exempt. So a lot of people have been watching this. But so there are 3 actually federal court cases actively challenging this rule. But the one, that state of Texas case, is the one today Judge Sean Jordan issued, in addition to the preliminary injunction he'd issued for the state of Texas back just before it took effect. He issued a nationwide injunction. Basically, he vacated the rule. So for all employers nationwide, it is not taking effect. So the January 1st increase isn't taking effect. That increase every 3 years will not either. And also, the July 1st increase that already took effect for everyone else is no longer in effect. So people might be like, what's now? So now, the minimum exempt salary for those roles that have that minimum salary, and there are a few exceptions. I've made videos on this of like teachers, lawyers, and doctors are exempted from the minimum salary. But a lot of those that are in different categories do have the minimum. That minimum has gone back to $35,600, roughly. And so it's gone back to that. So some people are like, wait, but what if my employer increased to $44,000 previously? Again, now, while that's not required by law, employers that are like, what are we supposed to do now? I'm not going to give anyone advice, but I will note that decreasing people's salaries does not tend to be well received. But so now employers trying to decide, okay, so what's going to happen? So in court, when this gets halted and vacated, people may say, but there are these other court cases. But again, what's likely to happen is those kind of, whether they go on hold. But this opinion halting the rule from taking effect, yes, the Department of Labor can appeal this. But that appeal is unlikely to go anywhere, especially before President Trump takes office in January, and all of a sudden his Department of Labor comes in. And so if people are like, but what do you know what President Trump would do about this? Well, the same thing happened literally in 2016, almost 8 years ago to the day, where President Obama's Department of Labor had issued a huge jump to the minimum salary. It got struck down by a federal judge November of 2016. And so then when President Trump took office, his Department of Labor no longer pushed for that big increase. They ended up coming up with a compromise. So that's why that current level now is about $35,600. That was an increase from where it had been previously, but it was a lot lower than what President Obama's Department of Labor was looking to move it to. So then the question, okay, well, will President Trump's administration seek to increase it again? I certainly do not know personally, but some things that are notable from the opinion. And the opinion is like 65, I think, pages long and literally includes algebra in it. So I will not be reciting that or make you, read it to understand it. But some of the highlights are, In there, the reason that the court had struck it down is they said that the Department of Labor does not have the legal authority to do any of these increases. And it went by why the automatic increase isn't allowed, because you have to have like a notice and comment period, and it just loops in way too many people automatically in the court's opinion. Same for the January 1st increase, because they're like, it's basically the same thing that President Obama's Department of Labor tried to do in 2016 that we said no to. The July 1st, I was questioning whether the court might leave that intact, but the court had said, for example, even that on its own, that there were too many people that would have had their salaries increased or be converted to non-exempt. There were too many people affected. And so the court even specifically said even that July 1st increase was not allowed. So some of the questions like, okay, would President Trump come back under his Department of Labor and just increase just that July 1st amount to like 44,000? I mean, under this court's opinion, it's no, even that's not allowed. And so also the court in its opinion had noted that yes, the Department of Labor actually has the obligation to review the exemptions from time to time, but that hadn't been done. Often the average is about between 9 years of that happening. The court noted that, like sometimes it's been like 2 years, other times it's been 30 years between adjustments, but the average was 9. And if it was just done in 2019, then it's possible President Trump's Department of Labor will look at that and be like, we're good, we're not going to touch that. And so I don't know that I would personally see that as being a high priority of that Department of Labor. So it might remain at that 35,600 number. I personally have been curious why the Department of Labor hasn't touched really the duties test in many years. So you may see something like that. Again, I don't know that it's a high priority, but that's just some of what's happening with the court decisions and the election. So yes, this can be appealed, but as it gets appealed, the Fifth Circuit, where that appeal would go to, that appeal would not be heard likely before President Trump takes office. And even then going to the Supreme Court above that, it's unlikely that the Supreme Court would say, like, yes, this is allowed. They likely would agree that the Department of Labor did not have the authority. That's what most tend to agree. So in short, for those watching, those that have been excited about a pay increase on January 1st, bearer of bad news, or those HR or whatever departments looking to try to figure out what you're going to do. At least there's this decision, so it has been halted nationwide. So probably not very welcome news for those expecting an increase. And so some may say, wait, this is just like the non-compete ban. Because yes, in April, on the same day, the Department of Labor issued this increase, the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, had issued the non-compete ban. Both got struck down in Texas federal court. And so some people may be saying, so why do these government agencies do anything then if they're just going to get struck down in court? And it's a bit hard because, you're a government agency, you're trying to get things passed. But I think a lot of people looking at these expected these to get struck down in court. And so I don't think that it was that much of a surprise. And so it's kind of, I guess this is the checks and balances altogether of the different government agencies, some people may say. But candidly, I have a hard time looking at these and at the outset saying, like, I personally did not think there was any way either of these would take effect from the legal aspect. And so I think it's really hard for employees, and employers trying to plan this, but a lot of employees, they get their hopes up and then it gets squashed down in court. And so it's hard, but this is what happened, and that's what happened today.